When most people talk about manifestation, they're really talking about hoping. They're talking about wanting something in the future, imagining it, and waiting for reality to catch up. And what happens is they end up living in a state of anticipation rather than creation. The desire becomes something distant, a possibility rather than a lived identity. But conscious reality creation is not a philosophy of waiting. It's not about sitting in a quiet room and focusing hard enough that the universe delivers something to your doorstep. The universe, life, reality, whichever language you prefer, responds to engagement. And engagement is expressed through movement. This is why we're shifting the language here from manifesting to movement, because movement carries a very different internal posture. Movement assumes participation, and movement assumes direction. Movement assumes that you're already involved in the becoming of the result you say you want. So instead of asking, how do I manifest this? The question becomes, if I truly believe that this was already mine, how would I begin moving today? And that question alone can change everything because it takes you out of longing and into identity. Manifestation is not about getting something you don't have. It's about becoming the person for whom that reality is natural. The person who writes the book sits down to write, even when writing isn't perfect. The person who lives in financial ease shows up to make decisions from stability, not panic. The person who experiences love does not negotiate for worth, they embody it. Movement is how the subconscious gets the message. This is who I am now. Without movement, the subconscious doesn't believe you. It may hear the affirmations, it may see the vision board, it may feel the temporary emotional high of a good visualization session, but belief isn't confirmed in the moments of inspiration. Belief is confirmed in how you move when no one is watching. And I want to be clear here, movement is not about forcing outcomes or pushing yourself into strain. That's just pressure wearing spiritual clothing. Movement is simply the physical expression of alignment. It is the visible reflection of the identity you are choosing. You don't need dramatic leaps. You don't need sudden transformation. What creates change is consistent, grounded movement in the direction of your intention. Small steps compound. Daily presence compounds. Your identity rearranges itself one decision at a time. So the central shift is this. Don't wait for your new reality to show up before you act. Move as the one who has already received it, and the world will meet you exactly where you stand.
When we talk about movement, we're not talking about forcing progress or manufacturing momentum. We're talking about the way identity becomes reality. Because the core mechanism of creation is actually very straightforward. It goes identity, emotion, movement, reinforcement. Let's take that slowly. Everything begins with identity. Who you believe yourself to be, not who you say you are, not who you hope to become, but who you are operating as right now. Your identity determines the emotional tone you carry, which is your baseline expectation of how life works for you. And that emotional tone influences how you move, the behaviors you choose, the risks you take, the habits you repeat, and your movement reinforces the identity that initiated it. See, it's a loop, which is why wishing for change without altering identity results in frustration because the behavior never shifts. Someone can say, I'm manifesting abundance, but if they still identify as someone who struggles, They'll unconsciously make decisions that fit that identity. They'll hesitate, undercharge, delay, avoid opportunities, or explain success away when it arrives. Not because they lack desire, but because movement always matches identity, not intention. So the question becomes, how do we shift identity in a grounded, reliable way? Through movement, not emotion alone, not visualization alone, not positive thinking alone. Movement is the mechanism that updates the subconscious. You can tell the mind, I'm a writer, but the identity only becomes real when you sit down and write consistently. You can tell yourself, I'm someone who values their well being, but your identity shifts when you make choices aligned with that value repeatedly. Identity changes when behavior confirms the new story. And this is why so many people feel stuck. They're waiting for the confidence to act instead of acting their way into confidence. Confidence, worth, capacity, these are not prerequisites. They are outcomes of movement. When you move consistently, something subtle happens internally. Your subconscious begins to say, this must be who we are now because this is what we do. And the world, which is always responding to your internal state, adjusts accordingly. This is also why discipline has been misunderstood. We often think discipline means forcing ourselves to do things we don't want to do. But true discipline is simply choosing an alignment with the identity that you've already claimed. When the identity is real, the action becomes natural. So the real work isn't to push behavior. It's to make identity clear enough that the behavior follows. Movement is not the effort that gets you to the result. Movement is the expression of the result already being yours. When identity leads movement and movement reinforces identity, reality will reorganize around you. That's the mechanism.
Movement becomes effortless when it is connected to purpose. Not a grand, dramatic purpose, not the kind of purpose that needs to be announced or displayed. I mean, the quiet, steady knowing of what feels deeply true for you, what feels like yours to do in this lifetime. Purpose isn't something we invent, it isn't something we try to figure out by thinking harder. Purpose is something we recognize when we become quiet enough to notice what calls us. And that's where many people get stuck. Not because the purpose is unclear, but because there is too much mental noise to hear it. If we're always in motion mentally, scrolling, comparing, consuming, reacting, the mind becomes full of borrowed voices. Expectations, predictions, evaluations, fears. And beneath that, there is a much quieter voice that speaks without urgency. It doesn't shout, it doesn't demand, it simply knows. Purpose speaks in subtle recognition, not instruction. It sounds like, this is the kind of work that makes sense in my body. These are the kinds of conversations that energize me. This direction feels like home. To access that, we don't need to withdraw from the world. We simply need to create small pockets of silence. Not silence as in no sound, but silence as in no interference. Space where your thoughts settle enough so that you can sense the difference between impulse and inner direction. And when you do, you'll notice something important. Purpose feels like truth, not effort. There's a kind of ease to it, even when it asks you to grow, because purpose doesn't require you to become someone else. It simply asks you to become more yourself. And once purpose is recognized, something else arises: resistance. And that resistance usually comes in the form of old identity beliefs. It's not the right time. I'm not ready. Who am I to do this? What if I fail? These thoughts don't mean you're off track. They mean you're standing at the edge of expansion. Purpose doesn't eliminate fear. Purpose gives you something stronger than fear. It gives you orientation. It gives you a direction to move forward, even when comfort tries to hold you still. And this brings us back to movement. Purpose turns movement from effort into expression. When your movement aligns with your purpose, you're not forcing yourself to act. You're simply letting your internal truth become visible in the world. This is why purpose is the fuel. Purpose is what makes consistency possible. Purpose is what makes persistence sustainable. Purpose is what keeps movement grounded when external results are still forming. You don't need certainty to begin. You need orientation, and purpose provides that.
Once purpose comes into view, the next thing that tends to appear is friction. Not because you're wrong, not because you're off course, but because every intentional expansion brings you into contact with beliefs and identity patterns that were shaped in your past. These patterns aren't flaws, they're simply familiar. The mind tends to value familiarity over possibility. So when you begin moving in a new direction, the subconscious may respond with resistance, hesitation, procrastination, self-doubt, distraction, or even emotional discomfort. And many people interpret this as a sign to stop. They think the presence of resistance means the intention is misaligned. In reality, resistance is a sign of identity transition. It means you're shifting into a new version of yourself. And the key is this: you do not need to remove every limiting belief before you move. You do not need to solve your entire emotional history before you act. You do not need to think your way into alignment. You move your way into alignment. Because the subconscious updates itself through experience, not theory. Now, this is where many people get caught in spiritual or psychological loops, trying to trace every block, name every cause, heal every origin. The idea is that until the inner landscape is perfect, they cannot move. But this approach delays life indefinitely. The purpose of clearing is not to create a flawless mind. The purpose is to make enough space to move consistently. So instead of asking what belief is blocking me, try what small doable action reflects the identity that I am choosing. This reframes the entire process. Because when you can take a small aligned action, even if it feels imperfect, even if old thoughts are still present, you give your subconscious new evidence that this is who we are becoming. And the subconscious adapts to match behavior. This is also why analyzing resistance rarely resolves it. Resistance dissolves when the action it tries to prevent is taken anyway, calmly, steadily, without dramatizing the moment. For example, if the intention is to write, resistance may suggest waiting for clarity. But identity shifts when you write, even if the writing's messy. If the intention is to show up in your work, resistance may suggest refining your plan. But identity shifts when you show up, even if you feel unfinished. The breakthrough is recognizing that movement itself is the clearing. You don't have to feel ready to begin. Readiness is generated through repetition. Each time you move in alignment with the version of yourself that you are choosing resistance, loses its authority. Not by force, not through confrontation, but because the identity that resistance was protecting is no longer the one you're living from. You become someone new, one decision at a time.
When we talk about embodiment, we're talking about the emotional atmosphere you live in, not occasionally, but consistently. The emotional atmosphere of someone who has already received what they desire is very different from the emotional atmosphere of someone who is still hoping it might eventually happen.
Mm.
This is where conscious reality creation deepens. Most people try to feel the emotion after the circumstances change. They wait for evidence before allowing themselves to relax, to trust, to feel grounded, to feel expansive. But this keeps the desire in the future. It reinforces separation from the result. Emotion isn't something we express once the reality arrives. Emotion is part of what creates the reality. Think of emotion as the internal climate of the identity you are choosing. If you say you're stepping into abundance, the identity of abundance carries a feeling of enoughness, not urgency. If you say you're stepping into love, the identity of love carries the feeling of openness, not searching. If you say you're stepping into your purpose, that identity carries a quiet steadiness, not pressure. So the question is, what is the emotional tone of the version of me who already lives this reality? Not in a dramatic way, not in a performance way. Simply, how does that version of me feel as they move through a normal day? Calm, clear, self trusting, steady, light, unrushed. Emotional embodiment is not about hyping yourself into positivity. It is about shifting from trying to get somewhere to being the one who is already there. You don't have to maintain the emotional state all day. You don't have to sustain some artificial peak state. You simply have to be willing to recognize when you've dropped into the old emotional identity and to choose to return to the new one, gently without judgment. This is a practice of remembrance, not performance. This is because your nervous system actually learns from repetition of emotional cues. When the emotional tone becomes familiar, the identity becomes accepted. When the identity becomes accepted, movement becomes natural. And when movement becomes natural, reality shifts to match it. This is also where people sometimes misunderstand surrender. Surrender is not passive. Surrender is the willingness to let go of the need to control how the reality arrives, when it arrives, or what route it should take to get to you. Surrender is saying, I will feel like the version of myself who already has this, regardless of what is happening externally. And when you can hold that emotional orientation, even subtly, even imperfectly, the external world begins to reorganize to reflect it. Not because you forced reality to change, but because you became the version of yourself for whom that reality is natural. Identity first, emotion second, movement third. This is how reality reshapes from the inside out.
We've explored the internal architecture, identity, purpose, emotional embodiment, and we've looked at how movement is the confirmation signal that rewires the subconscious. Now I want to bring this into a clear, repeatable structure that you can actually apply daily without overwhelm and without the pressure of doing it perfectly. Think of creation as a continuous cycle rather than a one time technique. It's something you live, not something you attempt. Here is the cycle expressed simply. Clarify the direction. Begin moving in small, repeatable ways. Adjust identity through lived behavior. Sustain emotional orientation along the way. Let results unfold without forcing timing. If you recognize this, you'll see that manifestation is no longer a guessing game. It becomes a system. Let's walk through this with grounded clarity. Step 1, clarify the direction. Not in the sense of obsessing over every detail. You only need to know the general identity shift. For example, I am someone who creates consistently. I am someone who operates from stability. I am someone who chooses connection and openness. Direction is not a wish list. It's a statement of who you are becoming. Step 2, begin moving. Small, repeatable, observable movement. You don't start with a dramatic transformation. You start with one action that matches the identity that you're claiming. If the identity is expressed creativity, open the document and write for 10 minutes. If the identity is financial stability, make the one clear decision that reflects grounded stewardship. If the identity is emotional openness, initiate one authentic conversation. Movement doesn't need to be impressive. It needs to be consistent. Step 3, let behavior shift identity. Your mind will often try to negotiate your way back into the familiar. That's normal. But each time you repeat the movement, even in small forms, the subconscious says, this is who we are now. Identity repatterning is done through evidence, not thought. Step 4, maintain the emotional tone of the end state. Not all day, not through performance, simply by returning to it when you notice you've drifted. This is remembrance, and remembrance is enough. And step 5, let the unfolding take the form it takes. This is where surrender comes in, not through passivity, not through non-interference. When you are moving consistently as the version of yourself who has already received, reality doesn't need to be pushed. It reorganizes around you. That's when synchronicity appears. That's when support shows up. That's when opportunities find their way to you without strain. Because creation isn't about effort, it's about coherence. When identity, emotion, and movement match, the external world has nothing left to do except reflect that coherence back to you. So instead of asking, how do I get there? The more useful question is, how do I live from there now? Not later, not when proof arrives, now. Because you are never waiting for the reality. The reality is waiting for you to become the one who receives it.
If today's conversation resonated with you, take a moment to support the channel. It really does make a huge difference to us. Go ahead and like this video, share it with someone who's on their own path to conscious creation. And please subscribe if you'd like to stay connected for more discussions like this. And be sure to tap the notification bell so you'll know when new episodes are released. There's more depth to explore, and I'd love to have you with us for it. So until next time, think differently, dream boldly, and create consciously.